Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Parenting is Easy, Said No One Ever. I am your host, Hanani Abraham. And it's such an awesome discussion today with Karen, who has been at the forefront of parenting issues for the past number of years and has created an amazing blueprint for how to go about dealing with your children. I think one of the main things that we talked about, which I think was so helpful to me as a parent, hopefully to you as you start listening to this, is empowering decision-making within our children. I think it's so important because our job as parents is not just about today, but it's about tomorrow. And if they don't have proper decision-making, they're not going to be able to be in a place where they feel confident about themselves. I hope you enjoy this conversation. I know I say this often as much as I like recording it. So sit back, relax, enjoy your drink, enjoy this episode. I want to jump right into, our line of questioning that we have over here. And there's so many things for us to talk about, but I think when it comes to parenting, there are so many different things out there, so many different ways of how to be a parent, and obviously there's so many different kids that we can have, and even within an own family, we can have so many different kids. And I'm curious, how is there some sort of, whether it's an assessment or some direction that us as parents can have when it comes to dealing with our kids, that we know that the way we're going to deal with them will be correct for what that child needs? And where can us as parents, where can we start to make sure that how we're going to deal with our kids is going to be correct for them?
Wow, that is a great question. And something that really, truly cleared the cloud and brought clarity to my parenting relationships when I understood their personalities. And I did not in the beginning. When I began parenting, I was parenting based on my personality and how I was parented, and they were the strategies, and they weren't working with my oldest son. And it really wasn't until I attended a business conference on understanding personalities that it's almost like the cloud cleared and I could see why I had so many challenges, because my kids were wired so differently. And so
you're referring to specifically the personalities of each child individually, as opposed to the parent's personality. Okay.
Well, understanding myself and why I parented was part of it as well, because, working with the DISC model, I have more of that dominant.
Can you explain what that is, please?
Yeah. So working with the DISC model, there's the dominant, inspiring, supportive, and cautious personality styles. And it's very, without going into an assessment, which of course we use through our program, there's just really two observations. The first observation is, what is your pace in life? In other words, how does your motor run? Some personalities are fast-paced. They walk fast, talk fast, eat fast. They're always in a hurry, okay? They tend to be more positive and optimistic. They tend to be more energetic and enthusiastic. But then there's personalities that are just more reserved, or what we might call the introverts. And they prefer a slower pace. They want to take their time and think things through. They think about what they do before they do it, think about what they say before they say it. They're a little bit more cautious and reluctant to jump into things right away. Now, it's not right or wrong, but it is different. So if you are parenting a child that has a different pace than you, and I was, with my youngest daughter, I was very fast-going, fast-paced, and she was very reserved. And I'm thinking, why is this kid so pokey all the time? And the more I tried to get her to move quicker, go from second gear to third gear, I got shut down in tears. So that's just the first observation for parents to identify within themselves and their child, to find where the gap is, because that's really what we want to find, is where our differences are and how we adapt. That's the first observation.
So you're saying first we want to be able to know from the DISC model, whether you said it's dominant, inspiring, cautious, and
supportive. Dominant, inspiring, supportive, cautious, DIS and C. Yes. Yes.
Right. Okay. So I'm familiar enough to know there's a lot to do with whether the person is more outgoing or reserved. And so maybe you could talk about that a little bit. And are we first looking to see where we are on this chart, and then to see where our kids are? And also, are kids changing? Are they fluctuating in the different areas within the DISC model as well?
Yeah, great questions. Okay, so yes, when it comes to identifying, we need to understand ourselves as personalities. There's three parts of the framework that I work with. The first is becoming aware of the personality dynamics of the family. So in other words, your personality, what's driving your parenting, and your child's personality. The second part of the framework is to adapt our interactions to meet their social emotional needs and apply the right strategies. So we just talked about the first observation, which is your pace in life, how your motor runs. The second observation is, what is your priority in life? So how we spend our time pretty much determines what our priority in life is. Some people are task-driven individuals. They're all about results. They are the list-making crowd. They check things off the list. If they did something in the day not on the list, they put it on the list so they can check it off the list, because it's all about getting, I'm there too. It's all about getting results. And so can you see how that can drive our parenting? The other priority is more people or the relationship. And although there are people-oriented types that say, yes, I know I need to get a result, they can be easily distracted into making the relationship the priority, but not necessarily holding firm to boundaries and following through. Okay. So there's the blessing and the curse in here. So again, based on those two observations, so I try to keep it simple without going through an assessment, which we do with our program, but for parents who are just trying to quickly identify what is happening in my family, two observations. What is the pace of the individuals? What is the priority? Some kids are very results driven. They have an agenda, things they want to do. Other kids are flying by the seat of their pants. Okay. And it's not right or wrong, but it is different. So once we identify that, what their primary style is, because we're a blend of all four to a greater or lesser degree, then we can start to see how we can start meeting those social emotional needs. And I can talk to you about those in a minute too.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to back up over here for a second. When you talk about finding the agenda or finding what the goal is for the kid, at what age is this happening? Because I can have 7-8-year-olds, and I could see not really understanding what their agenda might be, but then my 16-year-old might be a little bit different, and obviously for my 3-year-old. We're not going to have a disc model yet, at least the way I'm looking at it, unless I'm missing something.
Yeah.
But, they're not something that I'm really going to try to apply to them. So, how does this work, and where do we start? When do we reassess?
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that I'm picking up from you is a concept we talked a lot about here on this podcast is to ABC the moment, is to always be curious and ask that question. And the more we ask questions, the more we'll get the answers, which is how we can then assess what's happening. So where and when do we start? How does this work from a 3, 8, or 16-year-old?
That's a great question. I knew from a very early age with Kyle, who was my firstborn, that Kyle was really strong-willed. He would do exactly what I asked him not to do right in front of me. He challenged me. So when I say he had an agenda, he was going to do what he wanted despite the boundaries that I set. He pushed the boundaries all the time, which really drove me crazy, because I felt like I had to reset boundaries, be firm with him all the time. Or I was swatting diapers, which, I was doing because my mom was a swatter, and that's a whole other story. And I didn't want to be that mom, but he'd look right at me and do exactly what I asked him not to touch, not to do. And I was like, there's something going on here and I don't understand. And that was at 18 months old. Okay. So I knew at a very young age. Now look, some kids will be a little bit more passive. You'll ask them not to do something, and when you leave the room, then they'll test you. Kyle tested me right. It was like eye contact. He'd look right at me and be like, so what are you going to do? So I started to
I could for sure relate to that. Okay? Yeah, that's my 8-year-old will be like, please don't touch that. She'd be like, this? This? I shouldn't touch this?
Yeah, this right. Thing? I know. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And so I saw that, and I was like, what is happening here? Why is he challenging me? Because he was going to do what he wanted when he wanted. And so that's what really started throwing me off in my early years of parenting. Granted, this is my first child, and he is the anti-anything I ask. I can't get compliance. So that's where it started, that I was seeing we were in conflict. Now, look, he has that dominant personality that he wants to be in charge, and so do I. But I'm the mom. I need to be in charge here. And he was like, no, I don't think so. I mean, in so many words, right? In so many words, it was like, no, I'm still going to do what I want. And because I didn't understand his temperament, all I was experiencing was his defiance, or defying what I said. And now, to me, you are disrespecting me, and I'm losing it on this boy. You know what I mean? You can't, and then I'm trying all the discipline, and all that did was make it worse, because I didn't understand what was driving his defiance. Right. The social emotional needs. Yeah. The social emotional needs of the dominant child, dominant personality in general, which I learned later, is challenge, choice, and control. If they're not being challenged, they will become the challenge. If they don't have choices and feel they have a level of control, is when we will experience defiance. So we tend to want to address the defiance because that's the surface behavior. But if we don't understand the why, which for Kyle was control, that was going to continue or even escalate because he was going to continue to challenge me to get control. So once I understood that this is what's driving the internal motivators, driving the external behavior, I needed to adapt and offer him choices within my boundaries so he felt a level of control. Is that making sense now? So my personality as the Nike...
for the dominant part.
For the dominant, right.
For the dominant child.
Yes. And that was my firstborn. So I did not understand this information when Kyle was in those younger years, 3, 4, 5, and 6. There were multiple signs of his temperament, even though those younger years, that I just didn't understand. And so understanding my personality, and I'm a teller mom, okay? I'm the Nike swish, just do it mom. And I'm telling him what to do all day long, directing and correcting, and we were in conflict. And I was creating that because I didn't understand him. So once I began adapting and offering him choices within my boundaries, do you want waffles or cereal for breakfast? Do you know what I mean? Instead of just making everybody waffles or everybody cereal, then of course you do that, and that's not what they wanted. And there we start our morning in a conflict. Right. I needed to learn to offer choices within my boundaries so he felt as though he had a choice and a level of control. Again, reducing the conflict.
Okay, so the choices within boundaries. So it's like telling my daughter, do you want to go to bed in 2 minutes or 5 minutes?
Yes.
Even though she may be 8, 9, 10 years old, but still giving them the feeling of autonomy or agency.
Yeah.
Which is something that I think I'm working on with my teenager.
Yeah.
But, I might have to start that a little bit earlier with this one.
Yeah.
Just to give her that sense of, okay, well, you have control over this.
Yes.
And if you don't keep to it, there's going to be consequences. There's going to be things that you're repercussions.
Right.
But at the same time, and leaving the ball in your court, how you're going to want doing this.
Do you want one story before bed or 2 stories before we go to bed? I mean, we can start this at an earlier age. But for me, I had to be intentional and think about the choices because that's not how I was wired. I have an agenda. So I was just spitting it out. And then I was getting resistance and wondering why. And because I was not meeting his social emotional needs. Look, I'm trying to get my needs met. But I'm not the only one in the relationship. So that was with the dominant personality. Now let's look at one of the other outgoing personalities. So the outgoing, fast-paced personality that focuses more on the people or relationship is what we call the I style. That's the I style, but they are inspiring. I mean, they are inspiring, influencing, impressive. They are just fun-loving kids. They have the attention span of a gnat, okay? Very short attention spans because it's not about the task. It's all about just having fun. They have so much energy and life. But when their social emotional needs, which are recognition, approval, and popularity, it's all about them. When those emotional needs are not being met, you will experience illogical behavior. They are the attention seekers. So if those needs are not being met, we experience illogical behavior. Again, we want to address the illogical behavior, but there's a reason why I'm experiencing illogical behavior because I'm not meeting those recognition, popularity, with their friends within the family. Just really, they are needy kids. Okay. When it comes to that in the relationship, that's important. So when we are experiencing illogical behavior, we need to say, what do I need to do differently in recognizing, giving them that recognition, that approval. I had to use my words and speak this. Now, look, in my personality, again, understanding yourself, I'm like, so do I have to do this all the time? Yeah, I guess I do if I don't want to be experiencing the behavior.
Right. So can a child switch, let's say between, I know right now we're talking about 2 of them, from the dominant and the inspiring. Can a child switch in different ages to be more dominant than to be more inspiring?
That's a great question. This is what we find when we do our assessments. When we complete our assessment, we have 2 different graphs. The first graph is what we call the basic style. In other words, how you're wired from birth. This is your natural comfort zone. The second assessment that is established by the questions or the stories that we do for, it's done in storybook form for the young kids, is what we call the environmental graph. So that's how we are adapting to our environment. That one changes. because our environment will pull out whatever is happening in that moment, in that season. That will happen. I do find when we get into the middle school, adolescent ages, that the people side, the relational sides tend to go up because relationships with peers become much more important than tasks. Even though they may be wired a certain way, their basic style, how they're wired from birth, how we're knit together in our mother's womb, that's our natural style and our comfort zone. But the environment, when we get into adolescence, as you know, developmentally, that the peers and relationships become much more important. So I do see a fluctuation in that. And it's not right or wrong, but we need to be aware, number one, that's a developmental thing through those years, but that there are still going to be needs that need to be met. And if we are not meeting them, they're going to go where those needs are met. And that's where we start to see a disconnect in relationships.
Sure. I think that's also where, I'm not sure how familiar you are with, Gabor Mate, and he talks about his attachment theory, and the concept of when we don't have the attachments the way they're supposed to be, that are nurturing, that are helpful for us in a healthy way, where children can start going and gravitate towards other things and others.
Yes.
And there is nothing wrong with it being peers, and being friends.
Right.
And I think one of the best things we can have as parents, I think it's the biggest blessing, one of the biggest blessings we can have as parents, is our kids having a really good, social
network.
Way, social network, and having good friends, people that, that we would feel comfortable to be in their house and in our house and away from us. That's, I think, one of the biggest blessings that we can have. But I think, there is nothing wrong with having a child have their peer group being the more dominant way of them socializing as opposed to the home. There's nothing. It's not a reflection on us as parents.
Nope.
And we want to be able to make sure that they're getting the right things from that.
Yeah.
But if they're not getting their social needs met, they're not getting their attention that they need. And like you were saying, there are certain kids that need it more than others. They're going to get it from other places.
They will.
Whether it's other people, whether it's devices, whether it's someone online that's going to give them the attention. So I think that's, something that's really important that, to talk about here. And I'm curious, when you have parents that are dealing with you, because, I think, and I obviously this whole blueprint is something we have to finish talking about, but I'm curious, just, taking a step back here for a second, when parents are talking to you and they're seeing that what their kid needs is a lot more than maybe they've given to other kids in the past, or maybe that they received themselves. I'm curious, how do you, when that question comes up, how is that something that you deal with within, the framework of how people are talking to you?
That is huge. And that is the big part of coaching in what I do, is understanding where our differences are and how do we close the gap. And that's when we start applying the right strategies or recommending strategies to the parents. So for instance, I was working with a mom whose daughter was high I. The mom and dad were both more SC, CD, very, very much on the task or reserved. And the high I daughter did get involved in some online stuff and ended up being sexually abused or attacked, at a very young age. Shut the daughter down. They needed to get police involved. It was a hot mess. And so they were trying to repair this relationship. So when we do the assessments, we can see where the gap is. We can see where the personalities are. We could see what the needs were. We went into our first strategy that I always introduce, which is affirmation statements. Begin to affirm the child for the natural strengths of their personality, who they are at the core of their being. And Shania, it took weeks for this mom to be comfortable with affirmation. Every week we're meeting and it's not happening. It feels fake. It feels awkward.
Sure.
And I just said to her, why is this so difficult? And this is what she said. No one did this for me.
Yeah, that's a really,
So you see the sins of the father, you see the generational curse. So I just asked her, can you just identify a couple of these statements that will connect with your daughter and apply those for the next couple of weeks? Because I gave her, I had 20 affirming word statements based on personality style. So just find the ones that fit.
Beautiful.
And she started applying these. And then she called me back and said they were out shopping. They were at a Lululemon. And the daughter starts talking to her mom about what happened, where she has not opened up about this experience in the Lululemon store. And I said, so that's when it's like, let's go get some coffee and take
yeah.
her, because it finally, she was finally opening up. But why? Because we were affirming her for who she was, which kind of what I say chips away the crust around the heart, so we can get to the heart of the child. When the child feels understood, because now we're affirming them at who they are at their core, then they feel safe to talk to us. If all we do is direct and correct, criticize and judge, why would they want to say anything to us?
Beautiful.
And so that's just a testimony of, yes, it was very difficult. And why was it difficult? Because all we bring into parenting is our personality and how we were parented in the past. And for this couple, no one ever affirmed them. And so it was very awkward for them to implement affirmation statements on their children, because that's just not, it was uncomfortable. It felt awkward. And even for me as a dominant mom, when I had to continue to affirm my kids and say thank you for every little stinking thing they did, I was like, for crying out loud. But it's me meeting their needs. And when they feel valued and appreciated for who they are, they want to do more. It builds their confidence. It builds their self-esteem. And the most important relationships foundation starts at home. And if we're not meeting it at home, this child is wandering because they don't know who they are. They don't know where they stand.
Yeah,
there's so much power.
There's so much power in that, and I'm so glad that you're saying this. And I've heard the version of a story like that in my own way in my practice so many different times. And this is the first I'm hearing about Lululemon, but I've heard about it from getting a pedicure to the gym to being in some other part of the mall. And I think the important thing that I want people to understand is for a child, especially a teenager, to open up to us as parents. It could take a lifetime, and it could be, you could have the hardest job in the world, but being a parent of a teenager, especially one that has something traumatic has happened to them that is really hard for them to talk about. You don't know when it's going to come, but when they're going to open up, it's because they feel that mommy or daddy is there for them, is there with them, and they're there to support and love them.
Yeah.
And in the middle of Lululemon, for some reason, this girl felt that, now it's time for me to start talking to mom. And our job as parents, this is the message where I think you're trying to say, Karen, is be there with and for your child, so that your child feels that they are able to go ahead and open up to you. And you don't know when that's going to happen. It could be on the drive home.
We don't.
It could be on the way back from a long weekend, and you're stuck in traffic for being on the road for already 3-4 hours. And they might just start talking in the middle of nowhere, but you have to be ready for it. The way I like talking about it in my office is our job as our kids get older and they go into their own autonomy and into adulthood, and they get their own lives and maybe their own families at a certain point, is making sure that they know that door is the door to the home is a door that they can always come open up. And I think that's what you're talking about. And that's what, this woman was doing. And I think affirmations, I'm so happy you talk about this. I know that's something that I talk about in my office as well. It could sound really fake at first, as we're saying them. And, I know there are so many different places you can find them online, and, to have different affirmations, and probably for, in the DISC model, there's probably specific ones for the different categories. And I'm sure you'll talk about that. But I think for parents to understand the concept of what affirmations are is, saying certain things to our kids, whether it's, you deserve to have certain things because of who you are, and for them to know that, oh wait, I do have a right to have a say in this relationship. I do have a right to have some privacy, and for a child to know that and feel that, and not just go by life with it just being, what do you mean? I have a sense of self. Yes, you have a sense of self. You have a sense of privacy. Your body is yours and no one else's. You have a right in a relationship that you're having with a potential partner, is something that, you have a say in too. And it's not a one-way street. And, you have a right to feel loved in the relationship. And whatever it is, there's so many different things out there, so many different affirmations that parents can find online, and just Google it, and Google the concept of affirmations. And you could put in specific words, whether it's affirmations regarding sports, regarding affirmations regarding, the home, and boundaries. Boundaries are a really big one. I know I use that. I have a laminated one in my office, actually, when we talk about boundaries. And I think what the studies have shown, at least from what I've seen, and maybe Karen, you could talk about this a little more, is affirmations as little as saying it 1 to 2 times a day and being consistent consistent about it,
Yeah.
is something that can be really, really helpful just based on how it's going to be retained within the person. But is there any information that you've seen that saying it a certain amount of times can really be something that can be beneficial?
So when I'm getting started, I usually recommend once or twice a week. If we do it too much and we haven't been doing it, the kids are like, what is going on here? You know what I mean? Like they're going to catch on to it really quickly. Like, why are you saying all these things to me in getting started? And what we do is we want to notice things. I notice that you're such a good friend. To XYZ, or I notice that when you put your mind to something, you're definitely going to accomplish it. So the affirmations aren't the praise. The affirmations are, I notice that you always tell me exactly how you feel. Now sometimes it didn't always come out pretty, but my son definitely told me how he felt. You know what I mean? There are times where we wasn't pretty, but I know that you always tell me exactly how you feel, and I know where you stand. So with the 20 affirmation statements based on personality style, once you identify the pace and priority and you can go into one of those quadrants, you can start checking off these word statements. I noticed that when you make a decision that you're very clear because you've done your work. You've done your homework before you made the decision, because some of my kids were not quick decision makers and it used to make me frustrated. But I knew they needed more time. But to affirm them for that and not make it look as though there was a problem with that. Make that something that was positive for them. So when you are speaking to look, tonight, nobody told me that I was a sweet girl, ever. I notice that you always do exactly what you say you're going to do, okay? That's what I've been told. I notice that when you make your mind up to do something, nothing's going to stop you. That's what they said to me. So if we are speaking words that aren't true to the heart of the child, they're like I couldn't tell that to my daughter. You're such a decisive personality, because she's been sitting there saying, I don't even know what I want for breakfast. So we need to make sure that we are using the right affirmations that's speaking to their heart, that will build and lift them up. And so that's why the power of the affirmation statements is the first strategy that I recommend, even just reconnecting, or even we need to repair and restore. Because when we start becoming critical of our kids, why do they want to spend any time with us? They're in their room. Why am I going to come out of the room if you're saying, did you get your homework done? You have 7 missing assignments. Your socks are still on the floor, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm back to my room. So when we start applying the word statements, the affirmation statements, then maybe they're coming to the island and having a snack and we're talking, because we're using other ways of communication to affirm them. When it feels good, they want to spend more time with it. If it doesn't, they're back to their room. Why would I want to come out if you're just going to criticize and judge me? I'll just go back to my room and get back on my digital device where things are a little nicer there.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, 100%. We
got to we got to flip the switch here.
Yeah. I'm blanking on the name right now, but I think it's Ron Siegel talks about the concept of being able to have, I think it's for every 3 to 4 positive statements is when you're allowed to have 1 negative statement. And it has to be.
I heard it was 7. Okay. I mean, it was 7 positives or 1 negative. I mean, but it is that high. Correct. It is that high.
And it's something I'm working on all the time.
And it's not just us. And it's what they're experiencing with their peers and at school when people say something negative about what they wear or how they look. You know what I mean? It's all that negative stuff that could be coming in even through social media, especially for our young girls, about how they should look or their hair or their bodies, or, it's all of that stuff that comes at them. And we really need to do double time on the affirmations and finding the positives, because the world's going to tear them down. If it takes 7 to 1, that's got to be a lot more affirmation that we need to. And I don't want it to be where it's soupy sappy and it's just weird, because the kids are going to catch on to that. But be genuine and be sincere with the positive things that you see in the kids. And sometimes it's the stuff that we may perceive as negative, like, Kyle was going to do what he wanted when he wanted, but you know what? At the same time, I knew that he wasn't going to do anything he didn't want to do, which when he got into those peer ages, I knew was going to be a good thing. I didn't have to worry about him smoking or drinking, because he wasn't going to do anything he didn't want to do, and he didn't want to do that. But my middle son, who was more relational and wanted the acceptance, that's the one I had to worry about, because he could easily be led to be accepted, not necessarily popular, but be accepted. And by being accepted, he can be easily led into doing things he shouldn't be doing to be part of that peer crowd.
I hear that. I love the way you talk, because I'm relating different things to different ones of my children. So, you spent a lot of time we talk about two of the main ones. We talk about dominant and inspiring.
Yes.
I know there are two others, if you don't mind,
Yes.
if we can get back to it, just to sort of, talk about them a little bit, and what as parents we can sort of, see within, I think it's, what is it, cautious and supportive, and go through those two things just a little bit more in detail.
Absolutely. So the two personality styles that are more on the reserve, that just prefer a slower pace, probably more the introverts. The supportive personality is, again, reserved, but focuses more on people and task. They are the people pleasers. They are supportive. They are stable. They are steady. They are shy. They don't embrace change right away. They overthink everything because they want to make sure everybody is happy. They are the people pleasers. They are very shy, but they are observing everything that's going on around them. And so they're not always the ones, even in the classroom, that's going to step up, raise their hand, and answer information. I find in a classroom environment, they become the invisible kids because they are not behavior problems. They want to please the teacher. They go to school because they love serving people and serving others. And the needs of that supportive personality are appreciation, security, and affirmation, which is very different. Although it's one of the people relationship quadrants, it's different than the recognition and popularity. It's a quieter version of that. So to have that appreciation, it's usually done one-on-one. If you were to say something in public about them, that would totally embarrass them and shut them down. Okay. So it's one thing for your child to overhear you saying something positive about them to somebody else. Like if I'm talking to my sister or talking to my mom about something that my child had done that I feel good about. But when you do that in front of a crowd of people, that just freaks them out. I mean, it's just like they can't receive that. So there's a difference between that recognition and the affirmation and appreciation. Okay. It's done more in a quieter way. But if those needs are not being met, that's when they become suckers. And they can get sucked into doing things because they want what? They want that acceptance. They want that appreciation in that way, right? So that was something that I really had to work on with my daughter, Anna. Anna is all of the supportive. I mean, I could just put her picture there for every one of the characteristics. It is her to a T. Now, as a dominant mom and a supportive daughter, we are diagonal across the model and polar opposites. So when I'm working with clients, and many times when we do the assessments, we see the huge gap on the assessment, that where the strength is on one is the low of the other, and that's where the gap is. And so as I said before, I struggled with her being so slow and not making decisions and just taking so long. I'm like, gosh, you're killing me. But I could power struggle her into making a decision. It's this or this. It's not that difficult. Right. Just pick one. You know what I mean? And she'll pick one just to please me. But then nothing happened because she didn't have enough time to think about it, or she wasn't comfortable with it. She did it because I was requiring her to do it. And once I realized that I was causing more stress on her, then we needed to take more time. I'll give you an example. So my kids needed to do a book report, and it needed to be, historical fiction. Now, there's a big library to try and find a historical fiction book. So I got a child who cannot make a decision, okay? So I need to take her to the library. We need to pick out a book for a book report. It wasn't like it was assigned. She needed to choose one. Here we go. So we went through, and I asked her to go through, and I just sat and I said, why don't you go pick out a few books and bring them back to me? Let's see what you got. And so she picked out a few books and see what you got. And then we started to read the covers about what they were about. Which ones do you think you're really interested in? All right, well, let's keep those and let's put the other ones back. We had to bring home more than one book. And then it was like, why don't you read the first chapter and tell me which one you think would be best for you, that you'd really be interested in? Do you see how to take her through a process of the decision-making without being critical of her? Why does it take so long? Just pick a book. Because that's what I'm thinking in my head. And so because every time she needed to make decisions, Shania, that I was able to take her through the process of elimination, weighing out pros and cons. When she went to get her wedding dress, and I'm thinking it's going to be a lot of wine before we get this wedding dress, okay? We went to the first salon, tried on 5 dresses, and number 2 was the one. And I said, is this your dress? And she said, yes. And I said, you just picked out a wedding dress in 45 minutes. but because she had
That
done
will
her
make a
homework,
lot
she knew
of
her
people
style,
jealous,
she
I
knew
can tell you that.
can I'm telling you that? So then we could go out and have dinner and have wine. You know what I mean? Like, but I think back when she was younger and she couldn't pick out a winter coat at 7 stores. You know what I'm saying? And this was like, I remember calling my husband saying, I'm coming home. I'm just going to lose it because this should not be so hard to pick out a stinking winter coat. You know what I'm thinking? But that's where she was because of the indecisiveness. But when we are not critical of that, but teach them the skills on how to make decisions, it empowered her. It gave her confidence, and she was ready to make decisions. She already knew how to process and be comfortable with that decision.
Right.
Now, see, as parents, sometimes we get short with them, and then or we use that as a criticism, you know, that they're so indecisive, and they are. I mean, it's part of their makeup. But rather than make them feel bad, how can we just teach them the strategies to take the time to process, so that when they make decisions, they're comfortable?
Exactly. And I like my daughter likes to say, like, sometimes she's like, Daddy, that's a you problem. Which I think she's 100% right. I agree with her, and I'm so happy that she reminds me of it, because she is right. And just because my daughter can't find a coat after 6 stores doesn't mean that it's not my problem. Now, it could be like, listen, sweetie, you're going to have that coat from last year because you didn't pick anything, and I can't take you to other stores because I don't have time. And I'm not upset. It is what it is. And, it's still, it'll fit you. It might be a little bit snug and a little bit short, but since you didn't pick anything, that's part of the consequences of you not picking. Now you want to pick something, you don't want to do your research beforehand, and that's on you. I can't help you with that. But I'm here for you if you want my help, if you want to look at places. Now, obviously, things are a little bit different today. I'm sure your daughter didn't order 85 coats from Amazon. Like I just see, like,
no, she didn't, but she does now that she's older. Right.
And then the returns,
back then we didn't have Amazon.
Exactly. I just see now my kids with shoes, and I feel like Zappos moved to Connecticut sometimes. Just the amount of shoes that we'll have, and
showing up at your door.
Exactly, and then they'll pick one finally, and we'll send the rest back. But I think that concept of teaching them that if you don't want to pick, that's okay. Understand there are consequences that come with that, and I think over time, like you're talking about with your daughter, then she can try on her second dress, which I'm sure for some people that concept doesn't even make sense. I mean, I know the way I joke about it, and again, my kids are not old enough to even think about wedding dresses, but wedding dresses are such a big deal. They have shows about it now. So,
and we watched them. That's probably why we could narrow it down. But she knew her designer, she knew her body type, she knew the line that she wanted. So she had done her homework. And what, shopping for that winter coat, I'm telling you, she found a coat that she thought she wanted. They didn't have the size. We went to another store. They had the coat in her size, and she still wasn't sure. That's when I was like,
oh boy.
Okay. So why don't we do this? Since this was the coat you liked and it's the size you want, why don't we just bring it home? And then you can decide if you want to keep it, great. If you don't, we'll bring it back. But since we've been out all day and this is what you thought you wanted and have in your size, let's just bring this one home for now. And then she took it home. She tried it on a number of times. She had to turn it in the mirror, this way, that way, butt check, all the things had to look a certain way. And then she cut the tags off. I knew we were keeping it, but I mean, it was
a
because
process,
when I finally found the coat in her size, and then she was like, I don't know. And I'm like, I'm texting my husband. We got to come home real soon because it's been a long day. But I didn't lose it on her. I lose it in my own head, but I didn't lose it on her. I had to be compassionate, understanding how she thinks. And not to be critical of her, but to help her with the process. And by teaching that process, and there was multiple times where we had to do the pros and cons list of things, we had to do it that way and then narrow it down. But I collaborated with her on it.
Yeah.
And then when it came time, she knew what she wanted. There was 5 dresses she tried on. Number 2, I thought was the one. It was the one. After 5 dresses, she put that one back on and came back out. And I said, is this your dress? And she said, yes. And I was like, no kidding.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So, okay. So just finishing up over here with this.
Let's go back to the cautious style. Yeah, let's finish up. So the cautious personality, again, is more reserved, but they're task driven. So they're cautious, calculating, competent. So when we work with the DISC model, a lot of the descriptive words we use start with that first letter. So it really makes it easy to identify traits as we look at the different quadrants. But a cautious personality is more of the perfectionist. I say they're more of the analytical thinkers. They are the deep thinkers. Okay, so their social emotional needs are quality answers, value, and excellence. When I say quality answers, it needs to be a good answer, because if it's not a good answer, they're going to ask you more questions because they are not clear on what you're saying. So they are the why kids. Why? They want to know the why. And I was like running out of why sometimes, but they are the why kids. But they really need to know because they want to be clear on their understandings. Right. And it's not right or wrong, it's different. But when their social emotional needs are not being met, they become cold and withdrawn. They shut down. I'm not talking about it. I don't want to do anything. I'm out. It's like they just tap out. And I noticed that a lot. And my kids are all, we're all a blend of four. But Kyle, for instance, was the dominant and cautious. So when you look on the model, they're both on the task-driven side. He was not very relational. His way was the right way. So not only was he dominant, his way was the right way, okay? There was no talking him out of that. And if things weren't going well, that's when he would shut down. Now, let me tell you what that led to. That led to a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety. Mm-hmm. Because you know what? Not everything's going to be your way. And sometimes your way is not always the right way when we are interacting with others in the world. So Kyle slipped into a depression, I'm going to say, probably at the age of 16. And I call it 4 really dark years, or probably early 20s before he came out of it. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He refused to take medication. It was a very difficult time for me as a mom, loving my son and seeing him and being in a very dark place for a very long time. And that is, if I could say, do the personality, it's the overanalyzing and not verbalizing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a lot of sense.
Internally, but not communicating.
Right. So everything is staying in, and what happens to that, it sort of gets bottled up, and it has to go somewhere, and it
festers.
And it sort of like turns into like spoiled milk on the inside, and it makes it something that it lingers, and that lingering can lead to that depression that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And with each of the personalities, we can find mental health challenges that could come with that. Like the dominant personality can be labeled as ODD, oppositional defiant, right? And a lot of people had said that about Kyle. But when I looked at his personality assessments, this is how he's wired. I didn't want to label him. He was going to do what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it, but he would also have to learn the consequences of not yielding to authority and not complying with rules and regulations, especially in the workplace. The dominant and the inspiring can be labeled at ADHD, the hyperactive. Well, they have fast-paced motors. So yes, can you see how that could funnel into it? So a lot of times with parents, when they are wanting to assess, but then you can't get a clear assessment because it's not the disorder, it's their personality. And learning to help our kids to be the best they can be according to their design. So this is why I use the analogy of the parable. You know what I mean? Our plants are going to grow, but they need to be pruned because there's no fruit out there on the end. So it's the discipline of self-discipline, of learning how to operate within your strengths, because the strength pushed too far becomes the weakness or blind spot. And it's the pruning. The pruning is the discipline of self-discipline. I never want to change Kyle's strong will and determination. Lord knows I wanted to, but it was not easy to parent because that's what makes him him. But he did need to learn not only my pruning, but even in the real world where he ran into problems. Now he's 35, and probably within the last 5 years, he's now calling and asking me for advice, where before he did not ever want to hear what I had to say, but he experienced some of those logical consequences, and then he'll call and say, look, I don't want to be, a butthole at work or something he'll say to me, you know what I mean? But this is what's going on. How should I handle it? And now we can talk about it. But he's in his 30s now, Right. I think that's the frontal lobe logical brain finally ready to get some advice. I don't know.
Sure.
But so for each of the personalities, we can see that there can be some mental health concerns if we don't know how to meet those needs and help prune them. Discipline is a discipline of self-discipline. Just like with Anna with the indecisiveness, I watch the cycle over and over again. But when we teach them the skills and strategies, then they become stronger in those areas instead of it becoming a weakness. And so for the cautious, calculating personality, do overprocess. Things need to be a certain way. If it is not, they don't want to engage, they don't want to participate, they do shut down. Okay. And they don't necessarily verbalize. Now, as a dominant inspiring, they're my highest traits. I will always want to talk about it. I'm a problem solver. Let's work it out. And I had a child who gave me lip lock. When Kyle went into depression, he did not want to talk.
Right.
And it was the hardest thing. It's like he's in the cave and I'm going in the cave and I go in the cave. He steps further into the cave. It wasn't making it better. In fact, it probably made it worse. And I'm not going to say that I handled it all well. I was just saying, it's okay that you're going through this, but how can we get you help to get you beyond it? And he refused help because he didn't want to admit that the weakness. He didn't want all those things that I don't want to say, right, that I have to admit that. And then when he got to the other side, we were able to talk about it more as to what was going on. And the reason he just said he didn't want my help.
So just talk about the last little bit year. So, when we talk about that supportive child, at what place does a parent sort of start taking a step back and letting the child do their own thing and creating that autonomy? Well, I guess you could say taking the training wheels off the bike. And when and where does that work within that supportive role of the child?
It needs to start as early as possible. The first thing I always encourage parents is your kids need responsibilities. They need responsibilities. They need to be doing chores. They need to be taking ownership of their laundry and helping out around the house. Like that's the first thing I think across the board. So that is giving them confidence that they complete a task. They do it on their own. They know what they're doing. I have experienced times where I had to kind of coach Anna, especially on the things that she needed to do. And even my son, Eric, who had a lot of that S in him as well, and hold them accountable. Eric was not doing well in one of his classes, and it was probably one of his math classes. And if he wasn't doing well on his progress reports, he wasn't playing football Friday night. I mean, like he'd suit but not play. You know what I mean? So I was saying, so what's going on? We got a D. And then I was asking him about, does the teacher have hours? Yes, they do. And I said, would you be willing to go and talk to her? And he gave me the lamest excuses why he couldn't go talk to his teacher. I mean, they were so bad, so bad. And I'm sitting there thinking there's something going on. And then he finally just blurted out, I just can't do it. And he started crying. And I said, you just can't do what? He said, I just can't ask for help. And he was crying because it was, number one, admitting that I'm struggling and I don't want anybody to know. And number two, because he was so reserved in that part of his personality, to even speak up and ask for help. And I said, when does your teacher have open hours? And he told me. I said, can you promise me that you'll go this week? 2 different times. Will you promise me you'll go? So I let it go because I hold him accountable. A couple weeks later, I saw things were starting to get better. And I said, so have you been meeting with your teacher? And he said, yes. And I said, is it helping? And he said, yes. And he said, but I still wait till another student comes before I walk in the room. That's how reserved he was.
But I think
that's how
the biggest thing I'm taking away, Karen, from what you're saying is, we're sort of, wrapping it up over here. But I think that like the biggest thing that I'm taking from everything that you're saying is that your child at a certain point felt that they can come over to mommy and they can come ahead and say something.
Yeah.
And you gave him that, let's call it emotional permission to be in a place that when he was ready, he can say something to you. And for a child to say the words, I can't ask for help, or for your daughter to say, well, this is the dress, or, for whatever the situation is, it's because they were in a place where they're feeling, okay, I'm supportive enough by the people around me, i.e. my home situation. Like you were saying before, the home situation is of utmost importance when it comes to the raising of our children, that they can now go ahead and feel a certain way. So it gives them the right, if that's the right word to use, it gives them that permission to be able to share and to be part of something in a way where it's not just about doing A, B, and C, or doing what mommy wants, or doing what the school wants. It's about doing things that are going to better myself, and using the DISC model, I think, is a way that can be really, really helpful over here. Just because I know something that we've talked about, I'm also, being mindful of your time over here. One of the things that, that you talk about is, shift happens. And it's something that is, I think, I love the line. I have used it before. I wish I had a t-shirt that said those words on it sometimes. But curious if you could talk about that for a minute or two as we sort of, wind it down over here a little bit.
Yeah, well, it really is shifting. It really is shifting our approach from what we did. Look, a lot of times as parents, we're parenting in a way because we want our needs to be met. Okay. And I probably felt as though when my kids were doing well, it made me look like a better mom. And I had to realize it's not about you. When Kyle was still being defiant in school and I was showing up to the meetings, they knew it wasn't me. They knew that I was engaged, but they also knew Kyle, right? And he was going to do what he wanted. The same thing with my other kids that were struggling with insecurities and not asking for help, that I had to coach them through it. So it's shifting our approach from not you meet my needs, but how can I meet your needs so you can feel more confident to do what you need
How
to
can
do.
I help you
It's
meet
all
your
about,
needs?
yeah, it's communication and collaboration. And if we are too strict, and I'm not saying when you have that domineering drill sergeant parenting style, that you don't give your kids a voice to talk and you're already telling them what they need to do. Absolutely. And I could have fallen into that because that's my personality. But it wasn't working with the oldest, which was probably the wake-up call for me to say this approach isn't going to work. Look, my other two biological kids, because we have 7 in the family, they would have followed me because they were more of the people pleasers. But would they have felt safe to talk to me about things? I don't know. Right? Because I could have shut them down and gave them my opinion rather than what I had to learn was ask questions, listen, ask more questions, and listen some more. Seek first to understand and then be understood. Mm. That's Stephen Covey quote. It's really something that had to stick with me. Before I want to jump in and share what I think, let me find out a little bit more about where you're coming from and why.
Right.
And why it was so difficult for Eric to ask for help. It was pride and he was shy. You know what I mean? But he knew I had his back. Now, I wasn't going to go in and do it for him. I couldn't do that for him. And even when Anna was in high school, she was in a middle college program. So even as a sophomore and a junior in high school, she was on Eastern Michigan's campus taking college level classes to graduate with 60 college credits if she passed all those classes, which math and science were not easy. So we did those a couple times. But when she had to go in and meet with her professors, which she was required to do twice a semester, she was like panic mode. So I'd go to campus and I'd sit outside the building and she'd have to go up and talk to them. You know what I mean? And I would be there. You got this. It's okay. They're nice people. Right. I know they're professors and you may feel like, but it was, I've got your back, but I'm not doing it for you. And then after a couple times of doing that, she was able to go on her own. So how can I support them? And then, as you're saying, take the training wheels off until they're able to go on their own.
And I think that's our role constantly. And I think, like you're saying, we talk about different ages. As a 3-year-old, I'm going to take off the training wheels for different situations differently, as opposed to my 9-year-old, or as opposed to my 16-year-old. And I think that role never changes. And when you have kids that are 20, or as you were saying, 35 today, there are different things that, as long as our kids are feeling that, hey, I have that support, they're going to come back and they're going to be a part of that household because of the things that are happening here. And just, obviously there are so many more things I think for us to talk about. And before you talk about, where people can see more of this amazing blueprint, I'm curious if there's anything specific regarding the DISC model and regarding this blueprint in general that you've been talking about today. Any other like specific points that we didn't talk about that you feel like is important that we can get in the last few minutes over here?
Yeah. You and I both know that our family relationships are the most important relationships. This is the cornerstone and the foundation that will launch our kids as to how they interact with others in society. And no one teaches us how to raise a human being. Nobody teaches us how to raise a human being. And even educators and guidance counselors and people who I've worked with as clients have learned things in school, but still didn't know how to apply what we do with the parenting blueprint. There are a number of parenting programs out there, and I don't want to poo-poo anybody's stuff, but how do I know the right strategies if I don't understand what motivates my child? What motivates me in my parenting? Why was I so strict, and why did I have my regiment of what my expectation was? Because that's how I'm wired. But it didn't work because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's all about communication and collaboration. It all gets to a point where we start passing the baton and letting them taking it and run on their own, but knowing you're still in the stands and you've got them.
Beautiful.
This is what sets the parenting blueprint and parenting by design apart from any other parenting program out there. So when parents come in and start working with me, there are fires everywhere. And I'm sure you've experienced it. This is happening. This is happening. It's like there's fires everywhere. The lay of the land. It's just like fires popping up. But once we do the assessments and we can clearly see the data, that's when it's like,
everything becomes a lot clearer. But yeah, okay, so
they see it themselves, right? You know what I mean?
Sure.
And that's what my coaches are saying. It's an easy model because once the parents and the family sees what's going on, now we can it's almost like they get it. Now they're ready to adapt because it's not just what I'm saying, the data speaks. The DISC model has been used in business for 100 years. It could be 100 years. I mean, it's been used for leadership, team building, sales, you name it. But no one uses this as a cornerstone foundation for the most important relationships. We end up bending our kids out of shape rather than helping them, pruning them and helping them grow to be strong, independent, based on who they are at the core of their being. This is the legacy that we create. When our kids, look, Kyle went looking for a house. You know what he did? He called me and said, I want to look at some houses. Will you come up and look at houses with me? Now, this is a child who would not talk to me as a teenager, okay? And now he's making, will you look at my mortgage papers? I don't understand some of these terms. You want to be the go-to. When your kids need any advice, even as young adults, the go-to. When they are having problems anywhere, whether it's work, whether it's finances and their relationships. If you set that foundation now, that my mama gets me, my dad gets me, you're the one. You're the one. That's what makes this so different. Okay, so we just go deeper than the surface behavior to the why, start meeting the social emotional needs beneath the surface. And once we start meeting the needs beneath the surface, everything starts to bloom and open up. Your kids feel safe, seen, valued, and understood for who they are, not who we think they should be, and have them feeling as though they're not measuring up to our expectations. And that's the beauty of what we do, is this will change the relationships for a lifetime, not just a season of parenting.
So where can people see more about the Parenting Blueprint and more about the work that you do?
Yeah, so I actually, Teaching Our Youth is my business. So you can go to teachingouryouth.com. You can learn more about what I do for either staff professional development, my parent workshops, and more about the Parenting Blueprint. And I also have a Facebook group called Parent by Design with Karen Wagnon, where I share a lot of tips and strategies in there. A number of my Parenting Blueprint coaches are also in there. So you get different perspectives of different coaches with different niches in there. And feel free to come in. It is a safe place. There are a lot of Facebook groups for parenting, and some of them are very toxic. And so I'd rather invite people to come into a group where you are going to get good, solid information that will probably align better with your values than what you may be seeing with other parents who are just parents. I'm not saying there aren't good parents out there, and there are things that are worked. But I go out there and I see some stuff, and I'm like, this is not good advice. So come on in. It's safe. It's not judgmental. We all are working from the same philosophy of becoming aware of the personalities, adapting our interactions, and applying the right strategies to Parent by Design.
So what is the parenting group that people can find on Facebook?
Yeah, Parent by Design with Karen Wagnon.
Okay, and are there any other places on social media that people can find you?
Yeah, I also am on Instagram. K Wagnon is my Instagram as well. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. Karen Wagnon, of course, my business page, Teaching Our Youth. So there are a couple of different socials. If people want to learn more about just even the foundation of Parenting by Design, I think you may have the link to the Parenting Blueprint Toolkit.
And we will put that in
There's multiple pages. Show notes. Yeah. So that'll bring some clarity as to how can I quickly, just through those two observations that we talked about, the pace in life and the priority in life, for parents to get a better idea of what they may be experiencing in their kids' behavior. And if they want to learn more, they can always reach out to me and learn more about our coaching program or meet some of the other coaches that may be better fits for maybe some of the situations they may be experiencing in their families.
Amazing. And I think there's also a free PDF Parenting Blueprint Toolkit that we will post.
That's the toolkit, right.
We will put that in the show notes over here. So Karen, as we're sort of wrapping up here, let's finish with some rapid fire questions over here. First, is there any book or maybe a podcast or YouTube besides for your own that you would recommend people can get more information on parenting, whether it's specifically on the DISC model or something specific that you would recommend?
Well, one of the books that has always complemented what I do is the 5 love languages.
Beautiful.
Okay. So when we understand the personalities, and I use the love languages in my coaching as well, and we're starting to adapt, I feel that the 5 love languages is kind of like the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the books that I first, so that's something that I work with. So we may feel as though we're communicating, but if we have different love languages and we're speaking our language to somebody else, we still may feel a disconnect. The other book that was one of the first books that really helped me was called Different Children, Different Needs, written by Dr. Boyd. Dr. Robert Rohn was also a co-author on that as well. And so that really helped take me deeper into understanding the personalities of different children with different needs.
Okay.
And so that book has been dog-eared, highlighted, and still on my shelf today, which really helped me to dig deeper into understanding personalities within adult-child relationships. So the understanding of personalities and the 5 love languages, I think, is a complete package to really touch on every aspect of our relationships.
Right. Yeah.
Personally,
I think it's a very famous book. I think they're in their second or third printing already. I know it's Dr. Boyd and Dr. Ram are the 2 authors. I am familiar with that, and we'll try to have a link for that in the show notes as well. 2 more quick questions over here. I'm curious if you can think of a babysitter from history that's not a family member that you would be comfortable to watch your kids. Who would that be?
A babysitter in history. Oh, that is a good one. Oh, you're make me think on that one. Jeez, I am drawing a blank at this time, and let me tell you why. I did not live near anyone, had anyone watch my kids ever.
Well, it could be, it could be a figure, a figure of someone,
in history,
of someone that
really,
that you would be comfortable to be letting your kids be babysat by.
Yes, as Maya Angelou was someone who really kind of spoke to me in her way of empowerment, and so I would want my kids to be around that type of mindset and philosophy. And I also just love the curiosity, just allowing my kids to be curious.
Love it.
To be able to guide them, curiosity.
Okay, that's awesome.
So you got me on that one. You kind of stumped me on that one.
Well, if there would be a superpower, a everyday mundane superpower that you would like to have as a mom, what would that be, Karen?
Patience. Now that one was a lot quicker, wasn't it?